Well, here we are for the third session on the Epistle to the Hebrews. By way of an attempt at humor, I am going to call it a show must go on session. I hope I'm inspired enough. I was a little bit down with all this stuff going on. But nevertheless, I wanted to make some further introductory remarks about the epistle in general, and then start with the prologue, and again not go verse by verse or anything that detailed or sort of sequential, but rather try to get a foothold from the text that I'm looking at. I'm looking at my Jerusalem Bible in Spanish, annotated over 30 years or so. And so I also show, of course, this basic Bible in basic English, which I find to be a new discovery of a good Bible. But I would say that in general, this epistle is about the priesthood of Christ, a peculiar priesthood, a priesthood that is efficacious. It does actually open the way to the very sanctuary of God. This is that famous line in Hebrews 10:19 that Christ, opened the way, a new and living way that he inaugurated for us through the veil, that is, through his own flesh. And now he's a high priest sitting before the house of God, etc., of which the Jewish temple, according to this epistle, was a mere figure or shadow. So if there's any biblical writing where you have the famous type and antitype, meaning the type being a model in the Old Testament of the reality that corresponds to it, called the antitype. Don't think of anti as a bad word or anything, just a correspondence type thing in Greek. And so Christ is the one that actually gives us this access to God. And I think that this access to God is very much in line with Paul in Galatians, where when you preach the cross of Christ, you obtain a conversion or a circumcision of the heart, which is what actually effectuates that return from exile, quote unquote, that distance from God, that separation from God, which is really, I forget what they call it, the hoof of the nail and hoof or something like that. And it's part and parcel of the biblical message that you have an exile from Eden, and then from Egypt, and then from Babylon, and then back in the land. You are still in exile until the Messiah comes, and in essence leads the way back to the presence of God. This would be basically what the Day of Atonement would be about, the Jubilee occurring on the Day of Atonement, where all debts are canceled, including sins, all financial debts are canceled, ancestral lands are reacquired. And precisely on Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, was the day that the high priest, once a year and only once a year, could enter the Holy of Holies and clean all the sins of the people, including those of himself and including those of the sanctuary, or the impurities of the sanctuary. And the sins would be, chatat, asham, Awon, all these Hebrew terms that you could find on my website. If you looked on short articles on biblical topics or something like that, um, Emilio Chavez, or rather, yes, you type Emilio Chavez Bible Explainer and you'll get my website. In any case, it would be very interesting, to think about this. In the dissident calendar, Yom Kippur would always take place on a Friday. Jesus died on a Friday. So you have this, I think, in the background of Hebrews, and certainly in chapter 9, you have an explicit comparison of the old cult in the Day of Atonement with the new cult brought by Christ. So you have this peculiar, unique priesthood of Jesus Christ according to the category or order of Melchizedek, not Levitical, not descended from Levi, who was a descendant of Abraham, who was blessed by his superior Melchizedek. So, and then of course Psalm 110, sit at my right until I put your enemies for a footstool. The Lord said to my Lord. Sitting at the right of God would be, the appropriate place would be in the Holy of Holies, where God sits upon the cherubim. I like to say cherubim, but I know in English they like to say cherubim. God uses that ark with those cherubim as his footstool, so he's sitting there. And where would you sit at the right hand of God? It would be in the Holy of Holies. So that's where Jesus penetrates. So you have this efficacious access, this new and living way. Paul, I think, talks about that also in Romans and Ephesians. This word that I'm forgetting now, where we have this access to the very presence of God. And also you have an emphasis on the humanity of Jesus, who suffered just like us, and it was a man just like us in everything except sin. So that, what Cardinal Benoit, or when I took his course, he was not a cardinal, and by the time he became a cardinal, he wasn't teaching anymore, I don't think. But what Father Benoit would always emphasize was this humanity of Jesus in this letter, that he's able to be compassionate, etc. Of course, the letter itself says that, but we have a high priest who can be compassionate toward us. He's not sort of better than us. He became a man like any man, says Philippians 2. But at the same time, he is uniquely the high priest who did not have to offer a sacrifice for himself, because he was sinless. So this is the whole Christian kind of theology, Christology, etc. Prosagoge is the word. In Romans 5:3, we have this access, special entry, sort of like the backstage passes. I'm a rock fan. And then in Ephesians 2:18 and 3:12, you have that word again too. Prosagoge would be some sort of being able to enter into the very place. So you have that topic, and then you have the topic that I was talking about before of the journey, pilgrimage. And so you have this wonderful image in Hebrews that we are on a journey. We are in sort of in the desert, just like the Israelites were on the journey to the Holy Land. And of course with many obstacles along the way, etc. And he constantly draws comparisons, as does Paul. So you'll see that, I'll be making a lot of references to Paul, even though I don't think Paul wrote this, but there is some sense in sort of thinking of Paul when you, in some depth, get into the topics that are being discussed in both the Pauline corpus and in the letter to the Hebrews. So you have, and you have the exhortation in Hebrews, don't be like them that the Lord swore in Psalm 95, they shall not enter into my rest, etc. So you have this journey idea, which I find very useful. Today, for Catholics, we say the painful mysteries of the Rosary, sorrowful mysteries, and the fourth one, Jesus carries his cross uphill to Calvary, is an inspiration to carry our own cross daily, as we must try to do. So you have this idea, as I was saying, Neoplatonic, sort of Alexandrian Greek type thing, of a shadow world here of figures that really just reflect the reality up in the supralunar or above the moon, in heaven type world. And then, of course, you have the exhortations, which I talked about. I just talked about this one about, make sure you strive to enter into his rest and not be like those who died in the desert. Of course, one of my topics, of course, is that when the Israelites leave Egypt with Moses and Aaron, they sin and complain and really want to undo the salvific action of God in freeing them from slavery in Egypt. They want to go back to Egypt with the flesh pots and the onions and all the other comforts that they had even as slaves, and refuse the hardship, and they fear all kinds of things on the Exodus journey, especially in Numbers, it's described. And everything they feared was what happened. All the things that they feared happened, and so that whole generation, including Moses and Aaron, die, and only these two individuals, Joshua, which in Greek is Jesus, and Caleb, which was a non-Israelite that joined the Israelites, whose name means dog, which is a name for Gentiles. I find that a little interesting, that only Jesus and dog, the bounty hunter or something, but and the little ones who don't know right from wrong, Numbers 14 for this, shall enter the land. Moses only sees it from afar, waves at it or something, just like Hebrews 11 is going to talk about, repeat. In that great chapter, they saw the promises from afar and sort of greeted them from afar, just like Moses sees the land, but is refused entry by God. And so you have this idea that only little ones, can be led by Jesus and this Gentile guy, can enter the land. And so with that, trying to keep this under 20 minutes, I want to go back to the prologue that we sort of had started a little bit, which is here. In times past, God came to our fathers through the prophets. I don't see, this is where I started, came, I don't know where this came comes from. He spoke, not came. So you see, every translation has issues. You should probably compare various translations. They actually have a New Testament translation comparison where they choose like 5 Bibles, and you can compare that. But I found this to be pretty good. I guess maybe not, I don't know. But now at the end of the days, in these last days, so this is also a Pauline thing. We've arrived at the last days. He sent the Son. So he spoke through the prophets before to the fathers. Fathers, I like fathers, not ancestors. These would be the patriarchs and some others. Spoke to some women too. Trust me, I'm a big feminist, I believe, for sure. But I don't like messing with the language too much, especially for, squeamish purposes, in my opinion. So he spoke through the prophets, and in these last days, eschatu, he spoke through the Son, or a Son, really. And the wonderful parallel to this is a parable, parable as a parallel in Mark 12, famous parable of the murderous vine dressers or tenants, which, since it appears in a certain form in the Gospel of Thomas, as I recall, and it is considered to be a real parable spoken by Jesus. And what's interesting about it is that it's the same idea. God sent the prophets, these servants, to get the fruits from the vineyard that he had carefully put a fence around and built a tower, etc. Just like supposed to be the longest quote of Isaiah 5, where the prophet sings of his friend, the beloved, who had a vineyard, the vineyard, from Egypt, of Psalm 80, if I'm not mistaken. Israel is a vineyard taken care of to produce fruits. And what Isaiah 5 says is that seeking good fruits, he only got sour grapes or bad grapes or hard grapes, or however you want to, Beushim, rotten grapes or something. And therefore, he's going to destroy that vineyard. We have to understand that it's exhortative language in Isaiah, Jews speaking to Jews, but nevertheless the idea is that this vineyard, did not produce the fruits. And in the parable of the murderous vintners or vine dressers or tenants, you have these series of prophets sent, very common Deuteronomic theme. I diligently sent the prophets, day by day, morning by morning, etc. Jeremiah 7 talks about that too. And they didn't listen, they didn't obey, etc. And what this Meshuggah, this crazy Lord of the vineyard, does is, after they've beaten up all his servants, the prophets, he says, "Oh, I think I'll send my son now. They'll listen to him." A very naive Lord of the vineyard, which is, the God, the crazy one, who sows seed everywhere, even where it's not going to grow, or he pays everyone the same wage, daily subsistence wage, whether you worked an hour or 8 hours. In Matthew, here, in the end, he sends his son. Eschaton, in Mark 12, he had a beloved son. The same as sort of the expression in Genesis 22 for Isaac, Abraham's darling son, etc. And they say, well, he's the heir of the vineyard. Let's kill him and take over the vineyard. But what do you have here in Hebrews 1? And again, I'm not going to like this translation at all. When I start reading Heritage, I blank out. He has appointed him heir of all things. So Jesus is the heir. You see the parallels between the beginning of Hebrews and the first verses of the letter to the beginning of Mark, and then the beginning of the letter to the Hebrews. Then it has this wonderful language about Jesus being the sort of like the splendor, the radiance of the glory of God, the hypostasis, actually the hypalgausma, which is I think it's found in the book of Wisdom, 7:26, and you have also he's the character, it's like the imprint that a stamp leaves, etc., of his hypostasis. If you know a little theology, you know hypostasis is the hypostatic union of the two natures in Christ. But we have to stop there and continue and go over this next time.